Testing, testing. Shit. Okay, give me 1 sec, guys. I'm trying to. It's my first time. Is everyone hearing me? If you're hearing me, put yes in the chat. Okay. Window, right. Okay. Share. Okay, I'm just setting things up. Okay, I see you have great sound. I want to be able to share some of the articles and maps that I have, but I'm not sure. Damn, how am I doing this? Oh boy. Just bear with me 1 second. Mm. Seeing all the love in the chats. Now tell me something. I'm trying to share this other window. Share a tab to share audio. It's not coming up. Let me see. Okay. If anyone knows how to share another window on my screen, you can type it in. So I can't figure out how to show the maps and the articles I have on screen. Don't know why. 1 second. Choose the stream or webcam option. Why is it saying I don't have access to this feature? I don't know. Do I need to start over this? It says I don't have access to stream or webcam. There's a button there's a button here that says share screen. Select the tab to share. Click share. It's not sharing. I don't know. Oh. Okay. We have 5 more minutes before we start. Need to figure this out. Okay, maybe I'll have to do this without the maps, but it's not going to be as good. Let me see. There's got to be a way, man. There's got to be a way to get this in. Share entire screen. Okay. Okay, maybe I'll have to do it on my phone if that's the case. Let me settings. Yeah, that's what I clicked. I clicked the share screen. I click the share screen button and I want to share the entire screen and I click it. I click share, but nothing is changing. Are you guys seeing this article I have here? It's a Reuters article. If you're seeing this Reuters article, type yes. If not, say no. Okay, so we're not hearing it. All right, I'm going to try. I'll conduct this live stream without being able to show the maps and the articles, but I had a lot of video footage set up. All right. Okay, let me see. I'm going to try and do it on my phone, but I don't have it organized. Okay, 1 second. Man. All right, so let's just start. When you click share screen, make sure you select the correct window, entire screen. Yeah, I did that. Click entire screen, and it says share, but I don't know. I click share and it's just not coming up. Okay, I'm gonna start because I don't think I'll figure this out in time. Okay. So the title of this, which is my first live stream, check the settings on the live control room. Okay, I'll just go ahead because I don't want to waste any more time. So the title of this live stream is called Cope, How Ukraine Deals with Its Military Defeats. And I got the idea of this live stream title from a recent article from New York Times. And the title is Ukraine's Donbass Strategy, Retreat Slowly and Maximize Russia's Losses. So first, let's get some terminology here. What does cope mean? So this is what I wish I could show you guys. Coping and seething from the Urban Dictionary. Let me see if I could pull it up on my phone. Coping and seething. Here's the definition. When you can't confront reality, so you lie to yourself and get extremely angry about it. So my definition for it, this is it here. Coping and seething, Urban Dictionary. My definition really is when you come up with delusional and false excuses to explain the grim reality. And I think this article from New York Times, which was published yesterday, it's behind a paywall, but it was summarized by a person on YouTube, on X. His name is War Translated. He's a pro-Ukrainian. And he summarized the essence of the article. Ukraine's strategy in Donbass is to slowly retreat while maximizing Russia's losses. To outside observers, Ukraine's withdrawal from Donbass may appear as the beginning of an end game, with Moscow seemingly gaining the upper hand on the battlefield. However, Ukrainian commanders and military experts dispute this. According to them, it is currently a war of attrition, with each side trying to wear down the other by inflicting maximum losses, hoping to break the opponent's potential and the will to continue the war. So, in essence, the Western media, and the Western media is relying on Ukrainian officials who tell them that this is their strategy. In essence, they're saying, don't pay too much heed to the multiple military setbacks Ukraine is experiencing on the battlefield because Ukraine has a strategy. They're going to retreat slowly and try to wear down the Russian army. So there are two main reasons I think this is demonstrably false. One reason is they are, in essence, adopting Russia's strategy that Russia used in 2022, when the Ukraine conducted their twin offensives to Kharkiv and Kherson, which the Western media was salivating over and calling it great battlefield victories, and Russia was on the brink of defeat. And what Russia said they were doing then was really a fighting withdrawal, the same thing that Russia did to Germany in World War II. The best particular example I thought was in Kherson on the left bank of the Dnieper River, where Russia had 2 or 3 defensive lines. And the plan was they would hit Ukraine from afar with their artillery and munitions and inflict heavy casualties because it's open steppe terrain and there's not much cover for the advancing Ukrainian troops. And when the Ukrainian troops get up close, Russia retreats to their secondary prepared defense line. But this obviously requires a lot of discipline and cohesion in the defense, because the retreat has to be in unison. They maintain their line and they retreat to the second line. Because this strategy can easily, obviously, turn into a rout if there's a breakthrough and the Ukrainians are allowed to encircle them. So Russia conducted that fighting withdrawal on the left bank of Kherson and inflicted heavy casualties on the Ukrainians. And I'm going to get into all that later. So Ukraine is now claiming that's what they're trying to do. So the first reason why I say this is obviously false is because the way the Ukrainians have been fighting in the Donbass is contrary to the strategy. They have holed themselves up into these cities like Bakhmut, like Avdiivka, like the recently captured Vuhledar, and they allow the Russians to encircle them on the flanks. They retreat too late, often when the last supply route is under fire control, and they take heavy losses. And if you've been following my channel, then I've detailed those battles, especially the last one in Vuhledar, where the Ukrainian soldiers who survived admitted in interviews that they were being hit by Russian drones and artillery as they tried to retreat. So for that reason alone, what this article in New York Times is saying is obviously false. But the second reason is that the whole idea of doing a fighting withdrawal to wear down the attacking enemy's offensive is that you must have a sizable army in reserve so that you can counterattack, because that's the whole point. You retreat, you trade some territory to buy time, wear down the enemy, and you have to have a reserve to counterattack. Again, that's what we saw Russia, the Soviet Union, do in World War II after the battles of Kursk and Stalingrad. And that, in my opinion, occurred after the 2022 offensives. We saw the Russian counteroffensive in Bakhmut. Then Ukraine launched another counteroffensive in 2023. And that was the last one they've launched. And since then, it's been an unstoppable, slow, methodic advance for the Russians in Donetsk for almost a year now. So that's one element of coup. The other element of coup I notice, particularly in the information space from pro-Ukrainians and Westerners, even in the articles, is what I call a sense of nostalgia. Because things are going so badly on the battlefield right now, you see this tendency to go down memory lane and talk about the past when Ukraine, according to them, was winning the war. And they talk about, well, at least Ukraine was able to give Russia a bloody nose with the Kharkiv and Kherson offensives and the victory in Kiev and so on. And even when you read a lot of these recent Western articles, the title might tell you Vuhledar fell or report on some negativity on the front line. And the first 2 paragraphs start off with Russia launched its invasion 2022. They were beaten back by Kiev. Ukraine took back a lot of land in Kharkiv and Kherson, and then eventually get into the article. So this is all part of the coup, because I want to go back to those two twin offensives in the fall of 2022 that the entire Western media and Ukraine claims were major battlefield victories for the Ukrainian army. And I say that they were not major battlefield victories. And in fact, at least as with respect to Kherson, there's an arguable case that Kherson was really a strategic victory for Russia and not Ukraine. So before I get into that, I want to, and this is where I really wish I could share my screen, but I want to define what a battlefield victory is opposed to a strategic victory. And I have this video clip from a US veteran named Dan Castle. He has his own YouTube channel called The Wild Siberian. Some of you may know of him. But he did an interview with The Real Reporter, an excellent video. And I have a clip here where he talks about Kherson and what is a battlefield victory versus a strategic victory. So what I'm going to try to do, I'm going to try to play it right here on my screen. You won't be able to see it, but you should be able to hear his voice. So if you're hearing his voice clearly, just type in yes, so I'll leave it. If not, then I'm going to have to try and find it on my phone and turn the camera to you. So I'm going to try to play the video here. Before I do, if any of you guys are willing to make a small donation through Super Chat, you can feel free to do it. And I know most of you don't have YouTube channels. This is my first YouTube channel, and I'm, focusing on the Ukraine war. And I'm realizing that the AdSense revenues is not very high for this sort of content, especially as I'm making content that is not in accordance with the Western narrative. So I always appreciate any other support you all give for the research and time I put into these videos and productions. So okay, let me play this and let me know if you guys are hearing this. I wish you could see it, but I can't seem to figure that out at the moment. It's about a 2-minute clip. I'm gonna, let it run and then I will continue. So here we go. Make sure and comment and let me know if you're hearing it.
My predictions for the war on record, and even if you don't put this, but I think it'll take 3 to 4 major battles.
Firstly, could you clarify what you mean by major battle?
Okay, pause. Is everyone hearing this? Put a yes in the comments. Crystal clear. Okay, so everyone's hearing it. Okay, so he's about good. So I'm going to let it play.
And secondly, how many of these major battles have we seen so far?
Well, I'll name you one strategic victory on the Russian side, one strategic victory on the Ukrainian side. When the Russians decided to move south of that Dnieper River, that's a strategic victory. That's land you don't need to hold.
A but strategic is it victory a major, for who? For Ukraine?
For the Russians.
Retreating from Kherson.
Yes.
Is a victory.
So I'm going to tell you a different example. So it's a victory, a strategic victory for the Russians because it could have been a strategical failure by being surrounded and captured on the wrong side of the river. You have to think about it in a way. They could have lost a lot of men or they could have lost a lot of land.
Jubilation in the Ukrainian city of Kherson.
Now, that city right now is basically uninhabitable. Why? Because it sits right in the center of artillery and air superiority that's on the Russian side. That's a strategic victory. Not losing men and later using them is a victory militarily. Now let's talk about a Ukrainian victory where they had a big offensive in the north. Yes, the Russians were trying to get back in the Kharkiv region, but they still had small battles. They still have small battles pushing the Russians back to where they are now. And it's still a victory for the Ukrainians. Now, there's a famous saying by a commander in the Hannibal army. This is the Hannibal who who fought Rome and won many battles. One of his commanders said, Hannibal, you know how to gain a victory, but you do not know how to use it. This means you need to take an extra step after a victory to secure it and make it a major victory.
Essentially, an area twice the size of Greater London.
Had Ukraine continued pushing, surrounded maybe larger amounts of units, and caused a devastating amount of death toll on the Russians, it would be considered a major victory. With that,
good. So here we have some definitions from a US veteran. So a strategic victory, what I garner from what he said, a strategic victory is if you are able to take a large swath of land that has some strategic significance. But the best way to judge whether you have a strategic victory is if it eventually turns into a major battlefield victory. And a battlefield victory occurs when you are able to encircle or trap a large section of the enemy's army and eliminate them. That's a major battlefield victory. So when we use that terminology, now we can assess what happened in Kherson and Kharkiv. So now I want to go to some articles here. And I want to talk a lot about the Kherson offensive. And one thing that always, let's say, was curious to me was what was the strategy, even for the Russians, behind crossing the Dnieper River when they took that land bridge from Crimea to Donetsk, crossing the Dnieper River and occupying the left bank, a portion of the left bank of the Dnieper River. And I haven't heard much analysis on why the Russians decided to do that, because if you look at the map, and again, I wish I could show you the map because I have a map here, and the land bridge from Crimea to Donetsk really consists of a road, and it's a road that runs from Crimea. Okay, we have first donation from R. Ortiz. Shout out to R. Ortiz. And a donation. This is in another currency, but nevertheless, thank you for that. Right, so the land bridge road is really a road that runs from Crimea to Donetsk, but it runs along the base of that land bridge near the Sea of Azov. And Sea of Azov. Let me pull up the map here. Right. And the road, I wish you could see this, it passes directly through Melitopol and then runs near Berdyansk and runs through Mariupol and connects with Donetsk. That is the land bridge road. That was Russia's main supply route from Crimea to the Donbass. So in essence, all the territory that Russia occupied within the first month of the war, connecting from Crimea through Kherson, Zaporizhia, and to Donetsk, was really a buffer to protect that essential supply route that runs through Melitopol, which is also why the real goal of the 2023 counteroffensive from Ukraine was to strike deep through Zaporizhia and arrive at Melitopol so they can cut the land bridge road and destroy Russia's logistics and sort of break it apart and isolate Crimea. And Crimea was really the goal of the West and Ukraine for a strategic defeat of Russia. I mean, the idea that they would ever push all those Russian soldiers out of the entire occupied region was always a pipe dream. But if they could have cut that land bridge, their hope was that they could cause enough disruption and loss of morale in the Russian army that the people in Russia would lose faith in President Putin's ability to defend themselves, and they will get what President Biden has been asking for, which is a regime change. I don't ever think the West intended for a military victory, i.e. defeating the entire Russian army, because The Russian army is just too big, and Ukraine just does not have the resources to do that. They always want regime change by causing enough disruption to the Russian army. And of course, hopefully, along with the economic sanctions, it would have been enough to cause instability in Russia and, I don't know, activate some type of coup to overthrow President Putin. So that's a land bridge. God, I wish I could show you the map. Anyhow, I can't. So really and truly, the land bridge, to protect that road, I did not see the need for Russia to go beyond the Dnieper onto the left bank of the Kherson region. And if you look in Zaporizhia, they never occupied the entirety of Zaporizhia when they could have, because they had no resistance when they came in through Crimea at the beginning of the war. They chose a defense line that was in line with the Dnieper River. So they occupied about 60 to 70% of Zaporizhia and kept that in line with the advances they had in Donetsk. So why did they occupy the left bank of the Dnieper? So I can only speculate. Nobody I've seen has ever analyzed or asked or answered that question. I've heard some suggest that they occupied the left bank so that they'll have some troops across the river in the event that they decide to invade Odessa. However, I don't think that's likely, for the mere fact that the military aims that President Putin had were not territorial. If you read his speech on February 24th of 2022, his aims, as we all know, is demilitarization, denazification, liberating the Donbass, keeping Ukraine out of NATO. And he said, I do not intend to take any territory. So I don't think he had aims of going into Odessa. But what I do think, the only so that's the first theory. I don't think that theory works. The second theory I heard was that they wanted an extra buffer zone to create more distance to protect Crimea. In other words, they wanted to preclude the possibility of Ukraine bringing any long-range weapons on the Dnieper bank and being able to hit Crimea from the Dnieper River left bank. That is a possibility, but now that Russia has withdrawn from the west bank of Kherson since 2022, and we haven't seen any long-range strikes, unless I'm mistaken, from the left bank of the Dnieper and the Kherson region to Crimea. So it doesn't seem like that is even a possibility. So the only theory I had was that this occupation of the left bank of the Dnieper by the Russians served as a bridgehead. It is a bridgehead that actually protected any advance into Zaporizhia. Again, so I'm going to try to explain it without showing you the map. But in essence, if you were to pull up a map, because Russia had these troops over the river, if Ukraine decided to attack in Zaporizhia with the aim of getting to Melitopol in 2022, when Russia had the bridgehead on the left bank of the Dnieper, those Russian troops could supercross and encircle the Ukrainian troops in any advance that they make. That's how I see it. So I'm thinking that's why the Ukrainians probably thought they needed to get rid of this bridgehead on the left bank before doing the counteroffensive in Zaporizhia to sever the land bridge. Because as far as I am concerned, the 2023 Ukrainian counteroffensive is the only real counteroffensive that had any prospects of a strategic military victory for Ukraine. The counteroffensive in Kherson was clear as day, could only go as far as the Dnieper River. So even if they were successful, and they were successful in causing the Russians to withdraw from the left bank, that was the end of their counteroffensive when they hit the Dnieper River. So And they expended a lot of manpower and equipment to take back that area. And this is where we come to the definitions. It did not produce any major battlefield victory for Ukraine. And I'm going to prove why. So I have an article here from the Washington Post, and it was published in 2022 when the Kherson offensive was going on, September of 2022. It's entitled Wounded Ukrainian Soldiers Reveal the Steep Toll of the Kherson Offensive. This article tells you almost everything you need to know about the reality of this war, especially for the Ukrainians. It tells you, in essence, that they've been losing this war from day one. Okay, so before I get into it, come on, guys, let's get some more people in. We have 42 people in the chat, 30 likes. Get the likes up. Help boost this production. If you're enjoying this, feel free to give me a little love with a super chat donation. Also, I've enabled a membership to my channel. It's a paid membership. I have it on the lowest level, which is $5. And I'm going to release videos exclusive for members only. Those videos will talk more about geopolitics and the Iran-Israel war, which is the hottest topic right now. I put out a video 2 days ago for members only. But an interesting clip of a prediction from a Russian politician, Zhirinovsky. Some of you may know of him. And he predicted everything that's happening now. The Ukraine war, 20 years ago, by the way. The Israeli war, how he thinks it will end. And it's worth listening to because I think he's like the Russian Nostradamus. And I also talk a little bit about why I started this channel. Okay. So this article from Washington Post. Here's how it starts off. In dimly lit hospital rooms in southern Ukraine, soldiers with severed limbs, shrapnel wounds, mangled hands, and shattered joints recounted the lopsided disadvantages their units faced in the early days of a new offensive to expel Russian forces from the strategic city of Kherson. So first thing to note here, these journalists had to go into the hospitals behind the front line in Kherson to be able to get some first-hand reports. The reason why is key. Listen to the second paragraph. The interviews provided some of the first direct accounts of a push to retake captured territory that is so sensitive. Here's the key part. Ukrainian military commanders have barred reporters from visiting the front lines. A lot of people have made the point that all through World War II, we were able to see footage of the front lines, but in Ukraine, there was a media blackout. This partially contributes to why the why the media reportage was so bad and one-sided. I remember in 2022, when Ukraine retook Kharkiv, it was a total blitzkrieg on the media. I don't know if any of you remember that. It was as if the war was won by Ukraine. You could not get any unbiased reporting at all. And it was done on purpose. Hopefully, I don't know if they assumed that the Russian population was reading these reports and they would become panicked. But it was absolutely crazy. And part of the reason why is because even those journalists who wanted to be impartial, they could not get access to any realistic information from the front line because of the media blackout. Now, I'm going to play this other clip. Now, if any of you watched my last video, you would have seen the clip at the beginning. But I'm going to just play it again. It's not long. And there's a Republican senator called Tommy Tuberville who talks about this very same point. So I'm going to let it run here and take a listen.
Mr. President, I rise today to talk about the unwinnable war in Ukraine, which has already cost American taxpayers billions of dollars. Now, anyone who dares question the uniparty's narrative on the war in Ukraine is obviously going to get criticized. That's okay. The media has been complicit in pushing this narrative. Think about, when was the last time you saw live footage on the ground in Ukraine? It's rare because Ukraine is losing and is losing badly.
So even he says the same thing. The reason why we are not getting footage from the front line is because they're trying to hide the fact that Ukraine has been losing, and they've been losing even in this Kherson offensive. So let me get back to the article. So they interviewed these soldiers, and listen to what this soldier said. And there's a picture of this soldier. His name is Ihor, a 30-year-old Ukrainian platoon commander who injured his back when a tank he was driving crashed into a ditch. Listen to what he says, in quotations: "We lost 5 people for every one they did." Ihor had no military experience before Russia's invasion of Ukraine on February 24th. He made a living selling animal feed to pigs and cow farms. His replacement as platoon commander also had no previous military experience. So what we saw here really is that, and I've heard analysts like Scott Ritter, Colonel Douglas McGregor, they have said this: the first Ukrainian army, which was their best army, the NATO-trained army, the one that NATO has been training since 2014 to 2022. There was a Wall Street Journal article, I don't have it up, where they said that NATO trained on average 10,000 Ukrainians per year from 2014 to 2022. So that's at minimum 80,000. The Ukrainian army at the start of this escalation in 2022 had about 250,000 active troops. Most of those were NATO trained using NATO equipment. That was their strongest army. That army was defeated by the end of summer of 2022 in battles of Mariupol, Severodonetsk, and Lysychansk in the Luhansk region, when Russia took the entirety of Luhansk, because Ukrainians were fighting the way they are fighting now, fighting to their death, holed up in cities. So when Russia took those cities, most of those forces were defeated. In Mariupol was surrounded completely. At the end, when the battle was over, we saw maybe 2,000 prisoners of war captured by Russia. How many Ukrainians died has been top secret. I saw one publication that suggested that they had, I want to say, how much it was? I think 6 brigades in Mariupol. That's about 6 by 4, maybe 24,000 troops. No one escaped. They were all killed, and countless more in Luhansk. So that first army, according to Scott Ritter and Colonel Douglas McGregor, was destroyed. The army that they brought for their twin counteroffensives in the fall of 2022 was their second army, comprised largely of reservists and men dragged off the streets, because Ukraine had done a general mobilization months before. So what you're seeing here is men who before the war had no military experience, given a fast-track training and sent into the front lines to fight against a nuclear power. They did that because, let me tell you why Ukraine did that, in my opinion. After Ukraine lost Luhansk, lost the land bridge, lost Mariupol, things were not looking well for Zelensky. The West was asking, we have given you about $40 billion in aid so far, and you have nothing to show for it. You're losing territory, you're losing soldiers, you're losing our equipment. And the articles at that time were starting to get a bit negative. I remember in particular one article that said the Ukrainian regime is becoming increasingly authoritarian. I think they were signaling to him that, they're getting impatient. We need to see some results. And I think Zelensky said, we are going to launch these offensives in the least contested areas of the land bridge in order to get some kind of PR victory. I mean, that's my speculation. So, and if you go back to this article, the soldier talks about how the Russians were prepared, they were waiting for us. He said Russian tanks emerged from newly built cement fortifications to blast infantry with large caliber artillery. The vehicles would then shrink back beneath the concrete shelters, shielded from mortar and rocket fire. Russian hacking tools hijacked the drones of Ukrainian operators who saw their aircraft drift away helplessly behind enemy lines. Again, it says Ukraine has discouraged coverage of the offensive, resulting in an informational lag on a potentially pivotal inflection point in the nearly 7-month conflict. Let me read this last passage again. When Ihor, that same soldier who lost his tank in a ditch, who had no experience before, he said, when Ihor fired on Russian soldiers with his Kalashnikov rifle this week, he said it was his first time shooting at a human being. You don't think about anything, he said. You understand if you don't do it, they will do it. I mean, the whole article describes a lopsided battle where Russia had more and better ammunition, better trained soldiers, and better technology. So, in essence, this Kherson battle was really a slaughter of Ukrainians by the Russians, by a superior force. And the only reason that Russia had to withdraw was not because they were beaten, but because, and I must admit cleverly, the Ukrainians used their HIMARS to target the only 2 bridges that connected the left bank to the right bank of the Dnieper River in Kherson. I think one was destroyed and another one was damaged to the extent that the Russian commander, Sergei Surovikin, said, we have to pull back our forces lest they be stranded on the left bank, which would be a catastrophe. And I made a video about that withdrawal, which I think will go down as one of the best military withdrawals in the middle of a war ever done. How they were able to withdraw about 30,000 men and 5,000 units of heavy equipment over a damaged bridge under fire from an advancing Ukrainian army is a masterclass in deception. And in that video, I think it's called This is Where Ukraine Lost the War. In that video, I detail how the reporting from the Russian Ministry of Defense was sometime on Wednesday in November. They announced the withdrawal, and by Friday it was complete. And any military analyst worth his salt will tell you that withdrawal of that many troops would have taken weeks, if not months. So they must have employed some serious deception to be able to conduct that withdrawal under fire. Now, to prove to you, and the real point is this: at no point in that Kherson battle did Ukraine ever come close or was ever able to surrounding any portion of the Russian troops and causing any significant casualties. And therefore, it's definitely no major battlefield victory for Ukraine. And to the contrary, it could be argued that because Russia inflicted so many casualties, it was more of a victory for Russia. But I want to play this clip from Al Jazeera around that time. And they confirmed that despite all the hype, at best, Kherson was a political victory for Ukraine, and it was not a battlefield victory because they did not kill or cause Russians to surrender en masse. So this is from Al Jazeera, and this clip did not get a lot of views, but it was published shortly after the Kherson offensive. So how are we doing, guys? Are you with me? Is it interesting? Are you following? Just put a little yes in the chat to let me know that you're still with me. I see Mr. Ortiz, who donated the money, he said, "Greetings from Chile. We may be far away from the conflict, but the major implications from the conflict affect us all. For those who are confused by our currency, this amount, Chilean pesos, is just under 11 US dollars. So many thanks. 11 US dollars. That's the biggest donation I've ever gotten. Much appreciated, my friend from Chile. Come on, guys. I'm sure you guys could match what he has. Okay, so let's look to Al Jazeera. Here we are. Right, so I see Rene Patino, good analysis. Ben M still here. Is everyone else still here? Right, Bob Dobson, he's here. Who else is here with me? All right, so let me get this video prepared. Iona Howie is here. Withdrawal point was entertaining. Okay, let me get 2 more responses, and then I'm going to go into the Al Jazeera video. It says I have 42 people on the chat, so I'm sure I can get 2 more people to respond and let me know that they're still following. Just 2 more. Right, Stephen Rumi still here from Florida. Good, one more person respond, and we'll continue with the video. Good, Uros Rakovic. All right, okay, so let's go. From Serbia, lovely. Inter-Universal, yes, interesting. Great, so let's go. This is Al Jazeera after the Kherson withdrawal. From Japan, lovely. Let's go.
The battle for Kherson was a political victory for Ukraine, but it wasn't the military victory that everybody was hoping it would be. The Russians didn't panic. The Russians retreated in good order. The Russians didn't surrender en masse, which would have been an utter debacle and would have probably ended the war. But it made the Ukrainians wary. They suddenly thought, hang on a sec here, everyone's retreating a little too calmly, a little too easily. Let's not rush in, guys, and take everything, because we could be walking right into a trap here. It turns out that they weren't, but now the Russians have retreated to carefully prepared positions on the near side of the Dnieper River, and they fortified themselves, but it wasn't quite the military victory that everybody thought it was going to be, that the Russian forces were totally destroyed. They weren't destroyed, they just moved. But
good, so you heard it from Al Jazeera. There was no military or battlefield defeat for the Russians. It was a voluntary withdrawal that was well executed to prepared positions on the right side of the Dnieper River, and that ended the Kherson offensive. So let me summarize for you. The Russians inflicted disproportionate casualties on the Ukrainian attackers in the Kherson offensive, and after defeating their army, they voluntarily withdrew to the right bank of the Dnieper and to prepared fortifications. Stephen Romy says he loves my analysis. Very rare to see such unbiased reporting. Louise Proencha, I forgive my pronunciation. How far do you think the Russians will go? Okay, I'm going to answer some questions near the end of this. So let me wrap up Kherson. So what happened to Kherson? So as you saw Mr. Dan Castle say, Kherson was a strategic victory. They successfully withdrew their troops. I add, they inflicted disproportionate casualties on the Ukrainians, and that turned into a battlefield victory. That after the retreat from Kherson, the next battle was Bakhmut. And let me be clear, all the while that the twin offensives from Ukraine in the fall of 2022 was occurring all the while. Whoa, Louis Parencha, €5. Much appreciated, my friend. Much appreciated. I'm going to actually, you know what I'm going to do? I need to find a way to give out some free membership to all my day one supporters and those who make donations. I'm going to figure it out and I'm going to try and give these free memberships. We have Oravka 2 Jam here. Is that Jamaica? Lovely. Okay. Bakhmut was the next battle. That is the first major battlefield victory of this war because the Russians was able to surround tens of thousands of Ukrainians in Bakhmut, destroy them, and take the territory, which was sort of a logistic hub. That was the first battlefield victory. And Kherson helped, and I'll tell you why. I don't have the article with me, but I remember reading an article in preparation for today's chat, today's live, that said all the while the twin offenses were occurring from Ukraine, Zelensky admitted that the main hotspot was in Donetsk, in Bakhmut, where the Russians were assaulting Bakhmut. Now, at this time, the Russians weren't making that much progress because Bakhmut was well fortified. In fact, the entirety of Donetsk has been well fortified since 2014. It's probably the most fortified area in the entirety of Europe. Fortified by NATO and Ukraine since 2014. All the major cities have fortifications, dragon's teeth, mazes of trenches. This is why it has taken Russia so long to crack that nut. But because they diverted so many Ukrainian troops to Kherson and inflicted so many casualties, the defense lines around Bakhmut were weakened. And then we saw them take Soledar within a week or two. And after that, the entire northern flank of Bakhmut collapsed in another week. And then the southern flank collapsed, and it was in a partial encirclement by January of 2023. And then the articles were coming out. There was one from Newsweek that said the average lifespan of a Ukrainian conscript in Bakhmut was 4 hours. In other words, if they enter Bakhmut by 8 a.m., by 12 p.m. noon, that entire brigade, that entire battalion was dead. Bakhmut was on the low ground. Russia occupied the heights. They brought in massive artillery firepower and shelled the city to death. Anything in there was shelled. Bakhmut is a whole other story. I think I could do a whole live on Bakhmut because that's when we get into Yevgeny Prigozhin and his maskirovka, his deception. I mean, I made a video about Yevgeny Prigozhin and the Prigozhin rebellion, which I consider a masterful ruse. And it's 27 minutes long. A lot of work went into it. And that be a whole event by itself. But I don't want to get into Bakhmut. So Kherson was not a military victory for Ukraine. It was a strategic victory for Russia. And it led to the siege of Bakhmut. We go on to Kharkiv. Kharkiv was a bit different. Again, if you have a map in front of you and you look up, Russia occupied about 20% of Kharkiv. Kharkiv, again, is outside of the land bridge. It's outside of the Donbass. So it's not that important to Russia. The only importance for Kharkiv, that bridgehead or that 20% of Kharkiv region they occupied, was again, it acted like a shoulder overlooking Donetsk and would have prevented any Ukrainian counteroffensive into Donetsk to push back any Russian advances, because once Russia had those troops in Kharkiv, they could, just like in Kherson, they can encircle any advances Ukraine made in Donetsk. So Ukraine had to remove those bridgeheads before they can attack in Zaporizhia. But Kharkiv was even less reported upon than Kherson. We didn't get any articles from Washington Post about what really occurred in Kharkiv. So there are really two articles that give you some analysis. And one, which I think is the best one, is from a US colonel, Daniel Davies. He has a YouTube channel, Deep Dive Daniel Davies. Some of you may know of him. And this article is published on the 12th of September in 2022, entitled, "The War in Ukraine is Not Over by a Long Shot." And here he talks about the Kharkiv offensive, successful offensive by Ukraine. It caught Russia off guard. But here's the key that here are the facts that we did not hear in the Western media. Again, he starts off talking about Kherson, and he corroborates what I've said. On August 29th, Ukraine launched its long-awaited offensive in Kherson region. The preponderance of evidence suggests that Ukraine's attacks suffered major casualties and achieved limited, if any, gains. Mind you, he published this article before Russia withdrew. Russia withdrew in November. This article is in September. So this is why the Kherson offensive was still ongoing. In preparation for its long-discussed operation, Russia sent several battle groups to the Kherson region to reinforce positions, some of which may have come from the Kharkiv region. This is the key part. On the 14th of August, 3 weeks before the Kharkiv offensive began, the Institute for the Study of War reported that Russian forces are likely committing volunteer units to the Izium-Sloviansk line, which is in Kharkiv, and are likely deprioritizing the Axis in favor of defending positions in southern Ukraine. Read this other paragraph. Officials from the Ukrainian armed forces told ISW that Russian troops near Izium had been redeploying to the southern axis in an effort to defend occupied territories in western Zaporizhia and Kherson oblasts. Russian troops in the Kharkiv region had been sparse since April. In summary, the reason why Ukraine had such a successful and rapid advance in Kharkiv is because the Russian troops weren't there. Russia left a thinly veiled defense of a couple thousand low-tier volunteer troops and territorial defense and moved their best units to defend in Kherson because they saw that Kherson was more important. Why? Because Kherson, as I speculate, protects the land bridge and protects Zaporizhia, which is the most vulnerable part of the land bridge on which Ukraine tried to penetrate in 2023. They saw Kharkiv as being less important. They built no defensive lines in Kharkiv. This is why Ukraine was able to advance so rapidly. So I can immediately say, you can immediately summarize that there's no major battlefield victory for Ukraine in Kharkiv because there were no Russian troops there to eliminate, and the Russian troops basically retreated as soon as the Ukrainians started their offensive, which is why they moved so fast. Was it strategic? Well, before I answer that question, let me read this other article. This is from Politico, and this is on the 26th of September. So again, while the offensives were occurring in Kharkiv and Kherson, entitled, "Huge Problem, Iranian Drones Pose New Threat to Ukraine." So most of the article is about the Iranian drones, but they talk briefly about the Kharkiv offensive. And here is the key part. So it says Ukrainian forces are now fighting in two fronts, advancing in the northeast from the Oskil River into the contested Donbass region and south from Kherson. So at this point, the Ukrainians had advanced until the Oskil River in Kharkiv. Were trying to cross it and begin entering the Luhansk region, where the first Russian defenses were. Right. Listen to this part here. In the northeast, i.e. in Kharkiv, Ukrainian soldiers are trying to retake ground using Toyotas and other civilian cars, which are particularly vulnerable to drone attack because their old armored vehicles were destroyed. Let me summarize that for you. Ukraine committed their best troops and their best armor to the Kherson offensive. Russia demilitarized them in that battle, destroyed most of their equipment to the extent that when they launched this Kharkiv offensive, which came after Kherson, by the way, they had to equip those units with civilian vehicles because their main armor was destroyed. Now, the reason why Ukraine thought it fit to do that is because their intelligence, their Starlink, their US satellites showed them that Russia had no defense lines in Kharkiv, very little troops, and therefore they will come up against very little resistance. So they have these civilian vehicles that can move very fast, which are not equipped for battle, but for speed. And they use that to enter into Kharkiv region for a fast blitzkrieg offensive. But when they reached the Oskil River, the first barrier, this is when they saw the advent of the Iranian Shahid drones. And as the article said, drones, the Shahid drones, it will take usually several hits to take out a tank or armored personnel carrier. But when you advance with civilian vehicles, you are a sitting duck. One drone will destroy your car parked in the garage. So you get an essence of what happened in Kharkiv as soon as Ukraine approached Russia's defenses. They were just like their comrades in Kherson, obliterated under Russia's firepower. Right. So neither Kherson nor Kharkiv, none of them are battlefield victories for Ukraine. Kherson was a strategic victory for Russia. Kharkiv arguably could have been a strategic victory for Ukraine, particularly because of their ability to recapture Izium. Now, I made a video about Ukraine's plan, and I showed you the map, which I can't show you now, the importance of Pokrovsk, which is the main town that Russia is gunning for in Donetsk, which is a logistic hub. But let's say Pokrovsk is here. There's a main highway that passes through Pokrovsk called the T0405 highway, I think, or something like that, or H04, H05. Passes through Pokrovsk and comes to Donetsk, and it lines up, or it meets the last defensive line in Donetsk, which is Druzivka, Konstantinivka, Kramatorsk, Stoviansk, in a semicircle. And that supply route from Pokrovsk passes through those four cities. Then it connects with another highway, the MO3 highway, that heads north, passes through Izium, and ends in Kharkiv city. What that tells you, now this is the last defensive line in Donetsk. Druzivka, Konstantinivka, Kramatorsk, Sloviansk. That means this last defensive line of four cities, in which no doubt there are tens of thousands of Ukrainians, can only be supplied through two routes, from the west, from Pokrovsk, and from the east through Izium and Kharkiv city. This is why Pokrovsk is so important. And Russia doesn't have to capture Pokrovsk. All they need to do is to cut that highway east of Pokrovsk, and therefore remove Ukraine's ability to supply the last defensive line from Pokrovsk, which means that those four cities can only be supplied from the east or the northeast through Izium. That's why I think it was so important for Ukraine to recapture Izium in their Kharkiv offensive. So it perhaps has some strategic benefit to Ukraine. Okay, so we're going for over an hour now, so I'm going to wrap it up because I see some people are dropping off. I didn't intend it for it to go so long. Um, so, in essence, we're seeing a lot of coup from Ukraine. There have been no battlefield victories. There's not a single time in this war that Ukraine has been winning or has been able to, as I said, obtain any battlefield victory against Russia. It does every time Ukraine comes up against a prepared Russian defense line, it becomes a lopsided battle in favor of Russia. Bakhmut, Avdiivka, Volodya, all these fortress cities has fallen to Russia by the same strategy of a partial encirclement. So the idea that Ukraine is conducting a fighting withdrawal in an attempt to wear down Russia is for the birds. And lastly, that thumbnail I have, you would see I have a map and it has a line drawn in yellow and it says last line. The point is, and this point was made by a Ukrainian mapper, and he says that yellow line, after that yellow line, there are no more fortifications for Ukraine in the entirety of Ukraine. In essence, once Russia captures Donetsk and pushes past that left line, there's nothing stopping the Russian army from marching all the way to Kiev if they so want to. Whether they will, I am not 100% sure. But given all these terrorist attacks we see from Ukraine, the Crocus Hall attack, the attacks in Belgorod, at some point, I think Putin probably should understand that as long as this Kiev regime exists, even if he takes Donetsk, even if the Ukrainian army is demilitarized, which, by the way, it is already, if you realize the Ukrainian army is not capable of launching any more offensives, and their goal was 1991 borders, and they are unable to launch any more offensive, which means they have admitted they have lost the war. They can never achieve their military aims. And they're not even able to hold a defensive line. That army is demilitarized. To put another way, if NATO stopped supplying Ukraine today, by the end of this week, Ukrainian army would either collapse or surrender. They are unable to fight this war on their own. It is a demilitarized army on life support from NATO. So if when Russia takes Donetsk, he can take that victory back to his Russian people and say, I've met the goals of the SMO. We have won. We've defeated Ukraine. We've defeated NATO. At that point, if Zelensky hasn't exited Ukraine yet to live in one of his mansions in Miami, well, if NATO does the unthinkable and decides to partition Ukraine, give Russia the territory they have annexed, and then bring the rest of Ukraine into NATO, I think Putin may realize he has to go for Kiev. Now, as I understand it, I heard this from a Russian military expert. He says Ukraine has about 100 to 150,000 troops stationed in Kiev, lightly armed, as sort of a garrison to defend the Kiev regime. But that's for another video. So I think that's more or less what I want to talk about in this video. I'll give a few minutes if anybody wants to ask any questions, and then I will sign off. Of course, if anybody else wants to make a donation, I would appreciate it now, and also consider signing up for paid membership. Augusto Mondrombe, Viva Bob Marley, Viva Russia, Viva True MPLA Communist. Wadich, thumbs up. The Clan Adventures, hi from Scotland. Inter Universal, he says I should edit this video with the maps and articles and publish a video too. That would be a good idea. That would take a lot of work. I would do it, but the problem, I think I'll make that for my members only. You know why? Because this is not a trending topic, and this won't get a lot of views. I already know this. This is purely academic discussion. He says, I think Russia will take Odessa eventually before Trump enters office. Maybe. I mean, I've heard Colonel Douglas McGregor comment that he thinks they will take Odessa. I mean, that will be a fatal blow to Ukraine's economy, because having lost the Donbass and those 4 regions. That is Ukraine's industrial region. That's where all the mining towns are. You have the Zaporizhia power plant, which is the second largest nuclear power plant in Europe, in Zaporizhia, under Russian control. The Azovstal steel factory, the second or the first largest steel factory in Europe again, under Russian control. So I think, I don't want to misquote the wrong figures, but I've heard somewhere it's between 60 to 70% of Ukraine's GDP, maybe in those 4 regions. Odessa is the only port by which Ukraine, exported their grains to get income. If Russia takes that and Ukraine is landlocked, it's a failed state. It's a rump state. All they will have is the rich, thick, black soil for agriculture. One point, somebody made the point once that it will become a cam girl nation. And the point is that, all the able-bodied men are either dead or dismembered or using prosthetic limbs. And they have this nation of women who don't have enough men to make families with. It will be a very poor nation. It was always corrupt. And for them to make money, they're going to have to set up a webcam and expose themselves to Western elites for some foreign currency. I mean, I'm slightly joking, but that may be the future of Ukraine if they don't surrender now and engage in peace talks and keep Odessa and try to build some kind of future. I mean, I'm not an expert on that, but that's how I see it. All right. So any other questions? Anyone else want to make a comment? I could read it out. Anyone else wants to make a donation? I'll give you guys 2 minutes, and if not, I'm going to sign off from the stream, and I hope you enjoyed it. It took me a few hours to get all these articles and videos together. It's unfortunate I couldn't show it to you all, but I hope I did enough for you to paint a clear picture of what of my thoughts about these twin offenses and the prospects for Ukraine in this war. I see Iona Howie. What's my background? Well, I'm from the Caribbean, I'm from Trinidad. I actually really got involved in this war after the Kiev withdrawal. Oh my God, I just remembered something else I want to show you all. I have another video. So this video, oh, how could I forget this? So this video, this clip I have, I'm sure most of you haven't seen it. Russia will have at least half of Ukraine in the coming next year and next. I think it's possible, but I don't know what Putin's plans are. That's the thing. How far he wants to go. As we know, most of East Ukraine is Russian speaking. So I know Putin doesn't want to govern Western Ukraine and govern people who are not aligned with Russia, because you don't want your army forever stuck in a guerrilla type warfare against a nation who doesn't want you there. Most of East Ukraine is Russian speaking, ethnic Russians. So it is possible he may want to go further. And a possible thing is he might keep those 4 territories as part of Russia, take some land further up to the Dnipro, but that land will just be like a demilitarized border state to keep a buffer between a hostile Western-oriented Ukraine and the Russian territory, kind of like what the Golan Heights is in between Syria and Israel. Right, so I'm an attorney at law. I really became interested in this war sometime around after Russia withdrew from Kiev. And that's around April, May, sometime around May, June of 2022. And I started following it. And you know what got me interested is when I started seeing these Western articles talking about Russia is the embodiment of evil and Putin is an evil dictator, and that none of which I believed. But it when I started showing these pictures of Ukrainian models with AK-47s, and they're trying to paint this picture that everyone in Ukraine is rising up to fight the evil Russians. Even these beautiful women with AK-47s are going to fight these Russians. I mean, it was all so childish and Hollywood-like to me. I immediately said I needed to find some more realistic news coverage. And that took me into a journey of getting outside of Western articles, like reading articles from Asia Times and Hindustan Times, which is from Indonesia. Then I went into Ukrainian articles, which were also, although biased, still a bit more accurate than Western articles. Then I came across Russia Today and Sputnik, and now I had access to a whole myriad of articles outside the West from Vietnam that give you better coverage. So, okay, so I have this last video clip I want to play, which proves my point that that Kiev offensive by Russia, two things: that it was not a defeat. Russia was not defeated in Kiev because Russia never tried to seize Kiev. They did not bring enough forces to seize Kiev. That's the first point. The second point is that that Kiev was really not quite a feint, but it was a fixing operation. There are two objectives: to force a peace deal, and secondly, to fix Ukrainian troops there so they can't reinforce their comrades in the Donbass. That was the 2 points of the Kiev offensive. It was never to take Kiev. So, all right, we had an hour 21 minutes, so I don't want to go too longer. If y'all are interested in hearing the video clip, I need at least 10 people to type in yes right now. If I don't get 10 people, I'll just end the live stream here. If too many people say no, I will end it. So 10 people to say yes. We have 1, 2, 3, 7 or 4. We only got 4. Need 6 more people to say yes. 5. Need 5 more. 5 more yeses. I see the viewership has taken a bit of a dip. I guess this video is a bit too long, but I have a lot of likes. Make sure and hit that like button. 5 more yeses, or else it's going to be for another day. 6. Yes, again. 6. Well, some people might be listening behind. Well, 4 more. 4 more. Come on, 4 more. 4 more yeses. 4 more yeses. My cat said yes. Okay, we give it to that. 7 yeses. 3 more. Just 3 more, guys. 3 more yeses. Right. Oh, no. That's you said it. 2 of you guys said yes already, so I still need 3 more. And I have to use the bathroom, so I can't hold off too long. 3 more yeses. Three more yeses. Okay, how about this? 3 more yeses, or somebody give me 1 more super chat donation, and I'll go into this video. Not my name. You have responded 3 times. All right, 8. 2 more yeses. Not my name is a funny guy. 2 more yeses or super chat. Oh, he did $12 on PayPal. 9. Okay, all right. So, Stephen, you gave $12 on PayPal. Okay, we'll go with that. Okay. So this last video is from Colonel Jacques Beau. I think he's either Swedish or from Switzerland, a retired colonel. And he gave this very insightful discussion about Russia's initial entry into Kiev. And he talks about how they divided the army between two thrusts, one thrust to Kiev and the main thrust to the land bridge, and how many troops were in the north and in the south. So listen to this analysis. It's about 2 minutes long, so I'm going to let it play.
In the Donbass area, where you have, in fact, the main thrust, that means where you will put more resources, the objective is the strategic objective, namely to demilitarize and denazify the threat to Donbass. And then you have, and that's absolutely consistent with the Russian doctrine, you have a second thrust that is supposed to facilitate the achievement of the main thrust. And this second thrust is the thrust that we have observed in the first phase of the conflict in the north towards Kiev. And here with two objectives, namely to pin down the Ukraine forces and to exert political pressure on the authorities in Kiev.
And that's almost the opposite, not almost, that is the opposite of what you hear Western leaders, especially President Biden, who said in just recent days that the objective of the Russians was to capture Kiev in 5 days, so he said, and because they failed to do that, et cetera. But you're saying that was not only did they not want to capture it in 5 days, it was a secondary objective for the primary objective.
Exactly. And in fact, if the Russians never said that, first of all, they never set a timeline for the operation. So they never said they would take Kiev or Ukraine in 1 day, 3 days, 1 week, or 2 weeks. They never said so. These were Western allegations. They mainly come from the Institute of Studies of War, but the Russians themselves had never put any timeline on their operation. And if you look at the way this was executed, the first phase, you could see, if you look at the number of battalion or battalion tactical group that were engaged in that in that operation, you will see that the main resources were, as a matter of fact, in the Donbass. This is still, as of today, this is still where the main operations are going on, where you have the most violent fightings. This is today, it is in that area here, so it's still in the Donbass area. While here around Kiev, it was only 1/3 of the potential that was engaged in the Donbass. You had only 22 battalion tactical groups, meaning that the Russians had never the potential and the capabilities to take over Kiev.
Right. Good. Now, let me give you some more insight into this video. In his analysis, he says, pause. Dan the Outback won 14.99 super chat. Much thanks. I eventually watch all of your videos, but rarely catch your videos live. Your analysis on this conflict has always been solid. Russia's on the right side of history. Thumbs up and a like. This is my first live. I'm going to do some more if you guys enjoyed it. Hopefully I'll get a bigger viewership next time. Right. So in his map, in his map, he is assessment that there were 22 battalion tactical groups that went to Kiev and 65 battalion tactical groups went into the Donbass. Now, battalion tactical group has between 700 to 800 units. So let me do the math. 22 by, let's say, 800. 17,000 troops. 17,000 troops that went to Kiev. 17,600. Remember that number. Now let's go 65 by 800. 52,000 went to the Donbass. So you see, there is no way that Russia would have taken Kiev with 17,000 troops, a city that has about 3 million population, where at least half of the Ukrainian army was stationed in Kiev waiting for Russia. And I could do a whole video about my analysis about what the Ukrainian strategy was at the beginning. But the majority, 52,000, went to the Donbass. That's not even the real point. 52 plus 17 is what? 62, 69, 70,000 troops. Russia came into Ukraine with 70,000 troops. For a country that's like the size of Texas or bigger, That is a minuscule amount of troops. Let me give you an example. When Germany invaded Poland, they came with 1.5 million troops. That's enough troops to capture the entirety of Poland, which is a country that is smaller than Ukraine. So when people tell you that Russia tried to either take Kiev or seize all of Ukraine with 70,000 troops, this is beyond delusion. It's absolute nonsense. This is a small army with limited goals. That's why it's not a war for Russia. That's why there's no general mobilization. This is a special military operation with limited goals. But there's another point I want to make, and this might take me for another 10 minutes. I'm going into things. I have all these thoughts here, and I could always find more stuff to talk about, and we are at an hour and a half. So I assume you guys want me to continue. I'll end with this last point. Russia, the agreed facts are that Russia amassed between 170 to 190,000 troops for this special military operation. All right? Now we hear here, according to the Skuno, that only about 70,000 came into Ukraine initially. Think about that. Think about that. That means Russia had another possible 90 to 100,000 troops still situated on the borders of Ukraine, perhaps in reserve, perhaps as a reinforcement. So when Ukraine and its Western backers try to tell you that Ukraine had inflicted heavy damage on Russia, even back then, even back in 2022, they were talking rubbish. And when Russia did a partial mobilization, and the narrative was Russia mobilized 300,000 troops to replace their losses, I'm like, Russia only had 70,000 troops in Ukraine. That mobilization could not be to replace Russia's losses. Let me read you this article that came on 20th of October from Reuters. It says Russia's partial mobilization is complete according to Shoigu. Listen to these figures. Shoigu said that of the 300,000 mobilized reservists, 218,000 remained in training, while 82,000 had been deployed to the conflict zone, of which 41,000 were in active service with their units. So he mobilizes 300,000 and about 82,000 enter. I think that's deception. I don't think Russia would mobilize 300,000 reservists and bring any of them on the battlefield without adequate training. What I think was the 82,000 that came in to show up the front lines in Ukraine after those twin offensives were completed came from those extra 100,000 troops that Russia had on the borders. I think those 300,000 reservists were sent into training. But Shoigu put it this way because I'm speculating. He wanted Ukraine to think that these troops coming in were undertrained to continue to induce Ukraine to keep attacking. Colonel Douglas McGregor said this, that after Russia took the Luhansk region, they looked at Donetsk and saw the intricacy and complex nature of the fortifications and minefields and mazes they built in Donetsk since 2014. And they knew this was the trap that NATO and Ukraine had for Russia. They expected to get Russia to launch a major offensive in Donetsk and incur massive casualties and stall. Russia decided after Luhansk that to win this war, they needed to induce the Ukrainians out of those defenses, out of those trenches, to attack Russia and impale themselves on the Russian defenses, demilitarize themselves, and then when they're weak, Russia will go on to take Donetsk when the Ukrainian army is beleaguered, which is what we're happening now. So the Russian strategy from 2022 up until the end of the Ukrainian counteroffensive in 2023 was defense and to lure the Ukrainians out into meat grinders like Bakhmut and Avdiivka and Volodar, or to attack Russia on the defenses and suffer disproportionate casualties. So, I have another clip. I have another clip, and this last clip is going to prove to you my point, which is a point I have made. Now, there's always been a question of, when do you think Ukraine really lost this war? The most pro-Russian analysts say ever since Russia got the land bridge, the war was lost because Ukraine would never be able to push them out. They may have a point, because Ukraine has not been able to push them out of the land bridge despite 3 offensives in Kherson and Kharkiv and in 2023. I say Ukraine lost this war after those twin offensives in 2022, where they burned through their strike capacity, lost too many troops, and were no longer a capable combat force. Most now say they lost it after the 2023 counteroffensive that stalled in October last year, but I say long before that. And to prove my point, my last clip is going to be from none other than the former Chief of Staff of the United States military, General Mark Milley, 4-star general. Listen to what he said after the 2022 twin offensives. And mind you, he's obviously pro-Ukrainian. So there's a lot of rosy pronouncements talking about Ukraine did so well and blah, blah, blah. But listen to the key parts. He's essentially saying this is as far as Ukraine can go. He said this at the end of 2022. And in essence, he was calling on Ukraine and the West to sue for peace, because it's not going to get better than this. Listen to this. Last clip. All right, let's go. 2 minutes.
Start with the Russians. Ukraine's a pretty big country. This is not a small piece of turf. And the probability of Russia achieving its strategic objectives, of conquering Ukraine, of overrunning Ukraine, the probability of that happening is close to 0.
You hear that? In essence, he is saying that Ukraine cannot achieve their military objectives. As of the end of 2022, the war was lost then. Let's continue.
I suppose theoretically it's possible, maybe, I guess, but I don't see it happening militarily. So I just don't see that happening. But they do currently occupy about 20% of that of Ukraine. So they occupy a piece of ground that's about 900 kilometers long, and I don't know, probably about 75 or 80 kilometers deep. So it's not a small piece of ground. And they invaded this country with upwards of 170, 180,000 troops.
Again, 170 to 180,000 troops. And according to Colonel Jacques Beau, only 70,000 came in 2 strikes. The rest of the troops were on the borders of Ukraine.
In multiple field armies, combined arms armies, and they have suffered a tremendous amount of casualties, but he's also done this mobilization and called up additional people.
Again, contradictory. They suffered tremendous casualties. They only have 70,000 troops, but suffered tremendous casualties. He talks about the mobilization, but those troops, to me, had not entered at that time.
Russians have reinforced. They still have significant Russian combat power inside Ukraine. Now,
taken a lot of casualties, but still has significant power in Ukraine with only 70,000 troops. Contradictions galore, but let's go ahead.
Ukraine's had great success in the defense. They did a tremendous job in defeating the Russian offensive. It's incredible what they were able to do. And then they went on the offensive at the beginning of September. And they had great success up in Kharkiv, and they've had better success even down in Kherson, as you just witnessed. But Kherson and Kharkiv, physically, geographically, are relatively small compared to the whole.
Trust me, when he said this, a lot of U.S. officials were enraged. Ukrainians were enraged at the fact that he would say all this effort they put into these 2 offensives, and he's essentially saying what you've taken is almost minuscule and insignificant compared to the whole.
So the military task of militarily kicking the Russians physically out of Ukraine is a very difficult task. And It's not going to happen in the next couple of weeks unless the Russian army completely collapses, which is unlikely. So in terms of probability, the probability of a Ukrainian military victory defined as kicking the Russians out of all of Ukraine, to include what they define or what they claim as Crimea, to the probability of that happening anytime soon is not high militarily.
He said that at the end of 2022. That was the high water mark of Ukraine's offensive. They didn't listen. They chastised General Mark Milley in the papers. He had to do another press conference and say the opposite of what he said. And the rest is history. Ukraine has gone from one defeat to the next since those fall 2022 offensives. They have not had a battlefield victory since. That was where the war was lost, in my opinion. Okay, that's it for today, guys. And we went for a long time, an hour and 40 minutes. I've never spoken so long about this war. I'm glad you guys took the time to listen. I hope you enjoyed it. As I said, consider joining my membership. I thank you all for the donations. It really encourages me. And I'm going to do one again sometime soon. Feel free to suggest some topics in the comments that you want me to do a live stream on. I will try to figure out how to show the articles and the videos on screen so that you can be more involved in the live stream. But nevertheless, I hope you enjoyed it. And thanks again, guys. Signing out.